It's not a showroom, it's a portal to the global kind of workplace at its best. It's got this great location, great people, great space, and just great products.
One thing that I also want to touch on is around the idea of playground and the idea of play, which was really crucial in the design of this space. You know, we really wanted to, you know, like James touched upon, not be like any other showroom. We really wanted to be playful with the space, and hopefully you guys experience that as you walk around. This idea of playfulness, not knowing what's around the corner. You know, you get to experience this, you get to be on a journey, and I think that's sort of really crucial in what we were designing. This piece here is the only bit of joinery in the space. Everything else is furniture. Yeah, and it is even sitting on a space for a piece of furniture. So it's, you know, we really wanted that to show off and that to be the main feature of the space.
So when you come in to this space, that idea of, you know, activating, inspiring is you have this great wall of new kind of product experimentation happening. You have maybe a first kind of main character kind of set piece in terms of what we have on Arcadia. And as you come through, you can kind of learn and explore in terms of looking at how all the other kind of products kind of work within the space seamlessly. And then we also have our spaces like our kind of material like that, kind of stuff is here where we can come together and we can create and share. When you have great people and great products and applications and a great team together, you're anything.
Hello and welcome. We'll just give it another 30 seconds here as our attendees are joining us, both here on the Zoom platform and as well as on LinkedIn Live. I look forward to having you join us on this lively discussion. All right, so let's begin. This is the 40th episode of Insights Live, brought to you by Space Door. And today we're going to be discussing the topic of learning from our architectural ancestry on carbon accounting versus regenerative design. We are joined today by an expert panel, and so we'd like to introduce them. We have Kim with Willis Towers Watson, Naomi with Gensler, myself here at Space Door, Alex, Harvey, and Roger Phillip. So Kim, why don't you give us an introduction and tell us a little bit about your role at Willis Towers Watson?
Thanks, Gordon. So I work within the real estate team of Willis Towers Watson, and I'm responsible for workplace strategy and change management across our Europe and APAC real estate. So globally, we have about 350 offices, 4.5 million square foot across all the different sites. I primarily work on a project level. So I work with businesses to translate their business needs into space requirements, work alongside the design team, and then continue to engage with the leadership, the colleagues throughout workshops, communications, and ensure at the end that we're capturing all the lessons learned from projects and feeding that back into the next projects we work on.
Fantastic. And we appreciate you joining us today and look forward to your insights into this topic. Naomi.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. It's nice to be here. My name's Naomi. I'm from Gensler, so it was lovely to see a few of my colleagues in that opening video there. I run one of our workplace studios here in the London office. It's our European hub, and we like to think of ourselves as designing for innovators. So most of our clients are in the sciences, in tech, in climate action, as well as consumer goods and product such as Space Store. So we've had the opportunity to collaborate very closely, not only in your products, but also in your showrooms, as you've seen.
Yeah, fantastic. And we do appreciate that the London Design Center and the New York Design Center have turned out very well. So thank you for that. And Roger.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I'm working at Space Store New Concepts, particularly been working on projects over the last year or so relating to sustainability. So this is a subject that's of great interest to me.
Thanks, Roger. Good to have you. And Alex.
Good. Thanks, Gordon. And thanks for the panelists for joining us today, Kim and Naomi. Appreciate you sparing the time and sharing your insights and experience. So as you mentioned, Gordon, my name's Alex Harvey, VP of Sales here at Space Store, and mainly focused on our strategic client relationships globally. So working with some of the largest and most creative and innovative organizations in understanding their workplace needs, their workplace strategies, and then how Space Store can partner with them to create furniture that helps them to implement and deliver on those strategies. And obviously a big part of that with almost every one of those global corporate clients is their sustainability goals and some of the social goals that they're putting together and trying to implement. So very on point topic, and looking forward to listening and learning and hopefully contributing as well. Thanks, Gordon.
No, thank you, Alex. And so I am Gordon MacDonald, VP of Strategic Accounts here at Space Store. I sit in our East Coast region, specifically out of our Philadelphia office. And I collaborate with our strategic accounts, and the conversation of sustainability is forefront in most of our clients' minds. And I think that should lead us on to kind of where we're going today. We have clients that have goals. A lot of companies set up corporate targets for sustainability. A lot of companies are trying to, get their arms, as you might say, around this topic. But how each partner plays a role in this. I thought, Naomi, maybe you can kick us off with how does Gensler consult with clients as well as your own sustainability goals to drive this conversation forward?
Yeah, it's a big question. And exactly as you said, we have clients who have really great ambitions, and they're seeing that it's important not only to align with their own values, their own corporate values and stated objectives as a company, but also to attract and retain the best talent, which is really what our clients who see themselves as innovators and kind of visionaries in their own field, they feel that they need to get the best talent in the world. And that talent is increasingly drawn to companies that align with their own mission and values and interests like that. So I think putting sustainability and the sustainability story forefront in everything that we do is absolutely critical. The how is a little trickier, and I think that's a process that we as an industry are still on. With our clients, we can do a lot at the project level, and that goes from interrogating the building, the size of the portfolio that they actually need, to a systems level. What are the right systems to be using? How do you heat it? How do you cool it? How do you account for peak loads and the Friday problem that a lot of offices are facing, all the way down to the materials level, which we've collaborated with the likes of Material Source to try to think about the future of materials and the future of furniture, as we've done with yourselves, to really push that towards a circular and biogenic future, which we're really excited about. But what we love is to really think beyond the projects and start to get on the coach with our clients and think about how we can use each project as a learning opportunity and get better and better and better by setting clear goals, by measuring how we do, and by learning from what worked and what didn't over the process.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think one of the challenges is understanding that journey, and then understanding what the goals are. You have sustainability, but I was noticing in my research on this topic, as I am not an authority on it at all, but it's become self-sustaining. And that's a big piece of this. How do we become self-sustaining in our society, in the way that we're designing products, So Kim, love to understand what you're doing at Willis Towers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I very much work at that project level, like Naomi mentioned. So we're looking at, before the building selection, it's really important to challenge the conventional assumptions on what our needs really are. So we're trying to rethink our spatial requirements. We typically partner with design firms to do this as well, to see how we can really optimize what space we end up needing. What can we do? What can be done well in an already existing space, like working from home, and that plays a key part at the moment. And also what can be shared with other companies. So looking at that service provider model as well, service offices, and perhaps optimizing communal meeting spaces. So bringing more of that sense of sharing across different occupiers, I think, is becoming more and more important, and we're seeing that across our portfolio as well. And essentially it therefore reduces the space we need. And then when looking at once we've gathered what space we need, it's really looking at taking responsibility to really try and shape what the industry should supply. So if all occupiers are really driving towards these sustainable goals, then the demand will hopefully shift that supply. So if companies continue to sign up for non-sustainable buildings, we're just feeding that demand, which essentially drives the supply. So if we take on leases for sustainable buildings, which are being operated with a net zero energy, we're starting to force the suppliers, whether that's kind of at the town planner level, the developers, the landlords, to really reconsider what they supply. And by being sustainable, I'm not saying nice new shiny eco builds are the best option, but retrofitted buildings, what the impact is. We look at that on a project by project basis, and we've been building steps in the last couple of years to really shape what our new standards are, from an RFP process to build out requirements. We make sure that we're partnering with other companies who share those values.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things that I think came up in a conversation recently was leaning on partners to help you on that sustainable journey. Love to hear more about that. What do you look for in partners? We particularly are working with a large consulting firm, and they have their world climate goals. And that, they made a statement that by 2025, 100% of their vendors have to have their net zero goals set. So, it's really a little bit of what you're saying there. It's shifting that responsibility down, right back to the basic, who our suppliers are, who are we choosing. I'd love to understand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, certainly. So we are conscious that the asks that we're putting into the likes of RFPs and RFIs need to be aligned with building scale and markets as well. Not one size doesn't fit all across all countries, for example, but we've really been adjusting our RFPs, our scorecards, to really elevate the importance of sustainability. And even things like having lease clauses put in to really reflect our focus on sustainability as a core value. So that's whether that's renewable energy, green commuting, standards for the fit outs. It's ensuring that the people that we're partnering with are, as you say, aligned with our values as well going forward.
And I think there's an interesting shade to that as you talk about regenerative design, which was in the title of the slide there. And what's exciting about regenerative design is it does include things like carbon counting, but it also includes social impact. What are we doing in terms of I always forget this word. What's the word when you have more bees and pigeons and things?
Biodiversity.
Biodiversity. Thank you. Biophilia was the first word that always comes to mind because it's written on the wall in front of me. Now that's all I can see. Biodiversity. Thank you. So the biodiversity net gain clause comes into effect very soon. It's something we're going to have to learn how to quantify and design for, and how to use that to enhance our design and experience. But what's exciting when you ask about partnerships, Gordon, is that take something like the social diversity aspect. We have more and more clients like Kim asking us, how are you improving the economic diversity of the community around you? How are you helping SMEs find their feet, scale, have a steady income? And so we're being asked more and more to partner with small entities to bring their artistry, their craftsmanship, and their unique perspective into projects that they might never have had the opportunity to interact with before. And I think that's actually a really exciting direction of travel that I think has come up very recently.
That's interesting, Naomi. I was thinking the same, actually. The conversation feels like in the last, I don't know, 5 or 7 years, it's moved on a lot from, where we saw a lot of people looking at carbon offsetting, the kind of much more joined up approach between design, client, supply side, in terms of what's the whole circular regenerative design that we can put into these projects and into a longer term future. A much more, as I joined up, and a longer term thought process around not just materiality, that's a really important part of it, but end of life, things like recycling, reuse, upcycling, design for reconfiguration, repurposing. There's so many different aspects that really appear to be very much at the forefront of a lot of the client conversations that I've been involved with recently. So it's fascinating to see how that's progressed in the last few years.
Absolutely. And I think where I get really excited, as somewhat of a techno optimist in spite of myself, is that we as designers don't have the answers yet. We don't have the right tools to be making the smartest decisions, or even to know what questions to ask. And so we're really looking to, in my case, I love to see what's out there in the startup community. What sort of tools are being invented and being tested, and what sort of solutions are out there looking for a problem in a way that we can help scale, we can help them refine what it is they have to offer, and then help get it to market faster. Because I think ultimately that's what we all need as an industry, is better solutions that are ready to help our clients meet their needs.
On a similar vein, one of my favorite parts of my role is being able to see, to do tours and to see what's out there as well, and to see all the new initiatives a particular company may be trialing, and seeing how it's actually working in real life, and if it's successful, then leveraging that and kind of building from that and celebrating it almost, and also putting it into our projects. So yeah, really using what the good stuff is out there, finding it and putting it in.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about kind of sharing resources, potentially like building tenants and that kind of thing. I think it's another really important part of maybe a bit more of a broad-minded and creative approach that's been developing over the last few years. But what you were saying earlier, Kim, about seeing what's out there in terms of new ideas, new concepts, new products. One of the things we've heard from a lot of clients, and I think we may have discussed this a few months ago, is that we're hearing that we want to be able to show our workforce that we've got, these initiatives around sustainability, but we want to be able to choose products that look sustainable, that actually somebody could just walk up to and see and just instinctively know that there's something recycled or repurposed, or there's some sustainability story behind it. And I think one of our clients was telling me the other day that he loves to hear when he hears his staff touring a client around, telling them the same sustainability stories. That's when it's come to life. That's when it's really started to become embedded within the organization, when you kind of see everyone telling that story and celebrating the initiatives that have been taken.
Yeah, shifting from that colleague awareness really through to them being proud and really built into the journey that they've been taken through. I'll see. One of the, you mentioned some of actually looking and feeling some of the sustainable products. So something actually I saw in a Space Doors showroom during Clerkenwell was the wallpaper, or Organoid. That's the one. And I absolutely loved it. So it is essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the wallpaper, it's basically a wallpaper alternative that's been built from either hay, coffee beans, flowers. So you could see the natural design, but you can also, it also captivates your other senses as well. So you can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it. So it engages all the senses. The actual materials used were flax backing, so it regulates temperature, noise cancelling, moisture regulating, so it's got all the good properties in there as well. So it's not just a pretty initiative, it's also quality materials. So things like that, it's great to see, and to see it's coming through the pipeline, and just looking to get more examples of things, as you say, products we can actually use in our projects that can captivate people in more than just one way.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, and the stories behind them. I remember talking to some of the team behind that product, and it's hand harvested in meadows in Austria. It's the kind of thing that sticks in your memory. That this was 6 or 8 months ago, and I can still remember the stories. But it becomes very emotive. Actually, it's more than just a finish and a material. But I guess maybe kind of taking that and zooming out to the bigger picture, the macro level. Be interested now in your thoughts around. We've got these individual materials and individual, maybe more tangible things that we can look and see. But how do you see clients trying to progress the conversation from maybe a bigger picture perspective? And I think you had an interesting project, which I'd love to hear you share some stories about that.
Sure. Yeah, so I do have a piece of pet research I'm happy to share as an example of where I hope we're going as an industry in terms of regenerative design. And this actually was born out of a conversation we had around the people may be familiar with the Orca system, which is installed in Iceland by a company called Climeworks. And essentially, it's a set of a whole bunch of fans out in the middle of nowhere, sucks in ambient air, captures the CO2 and sequesters it in the rock under the system. And a couple of us were sitting around and we saw the system and we thought, well, why are they sending fans out to the middle of nowhere? And why are they running electricity out to the middle of nowhere? I know 3,000 places right here that have fans and electricity. Isn't there a way for us to think about piggybacking on the systems we already have in buildings to turn them into carbon absorbers? So we actually did a little bit of research and we found that there are a couple companies right now, one in particular based out of Finland called Solitaire Power, and they essentially have a unit that sits on top of an air handling unit and captures, it's called direct air carbon capture, but it's actually carbon removal. So it removes carbon from ambient air while using the power and the ventilation systems of a building. And we wanted to test if this made any sense. Is this going to be part of our future? Is this part of our toolkit going forward as we all try to get to net zero? So we partnered with engineers in Troba, and we ran some life cycle assessments. We wanted to look at the materials themselves. We wanted to look at how much energy they use, the sorbent itself, the material that's actually capturing the carbon. How good is that for the environment? And after all of these really probing questions, we actually were really excited to find out that it works, that even the technology as it is today in its emergent state captures more carbon, removes more carbon from the atmosphere than it uses. And that number gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the grid decarbonizes. So in the UK, we expect to have a decarbonized grid. I think it's over the next 4 years. And as we hit that point, technologies like this become really important to augment things like solar and wind. So that was a really exciting finding. And then the next bit of it, which I'm even more excited about, is what we call the exhale part. So once you've captured all this ambient CO2 from the air, what can you do with it? That's actually the important bit. It needs to go someplace where it's sequestered. So we're looking at 3 different work streams right now. One is looking at a mineralized version, so turning it into a rock, and then saying, can we use it to actually replace some of the worst offenders within interior fit outs? Can you turn it into acoustic panels and gypsum wallboard? And that means that you're actually kind of harvesting buildings from thin air, which we just thought was the coolest idea. So we are working with some partners to see how we could do that and to what extent it's possible. We're looking at liquid applications of CO2. Believe it or not, liquid CO2, there's a shortage of it globally, despite the fact that it's all around us. So there's obvious applications in everything from soda streams, zip taps, espresso machines, all the way up to food preservation. And one application I really love is that it can be used as a long life battery. So you can imagine buildings can actually enable a decarbonized grid based on solar and wind by holding that electricity for longer. And then the last opportunity I'll mention is just a gaseous opportunity. So it can be used to enhance greenhouses. Obviously, plants inhale CO2, and lots of plants actually do much better at higher levels of CO2. They produce more. So you could imagine creating a whole ecosystem within an office building that is, as you said, self-sustaining. It grows its own food. Its soda streams are powered by the carbon you've pulled out of the atmosphere, and all the materials of your interior fit out are sequestered directly from that carbon. And so that's the sort of thing we get really excited about.
Absolutely, that sounds fascinating. So you've kind of sold us the dream. From I guess a couple of questions that just bounce around my head is how does this turn to reality? You know, what partnerships and initiatives need to kind of move this forward? And then maybe Kim, be interested from an occupier point of view, how would you see this fitting into the projects and buildings that you're looking at? And, you know, would a building that had this technology steer you towards that building for that reason?
Do you want to start, Kim? Or
yeah, from an occupier's perspective, absolutely. And I think we mentioned kind of partnering with the right people, but it's also from an occupier's perspective, also kind of putting your money where your mouth is. So actually investing not just for the end products, but to support them throughout that lifestyle of all the research that different companies are going through. So I think it's really, really key in supporting, celebrating these types of initiatives. So the more I hear, Naomi, I spoke yesterday about it, and the more I hear, the more I'm Googling and trying to research it more. So yeah, it certainly is, certainly of interest.
And I think to your point, Alex, on partnerships, you know, it does require some of this is as Reid Hoffman might say, the founder of LinkedIn, it's kind of building the plane while we're flying it, right? I think it requires the kind of client who's willing to take some risks and be on that journey together and understand that it might not work the first time, and we're trying to build something better together, right? So it's rather than a product mindset of I'm going to go buy something, it's really an experimental mindset of what can we create together.
Absolutely, and this it came up earlier in the conversation, didn't it? The pressure within the corporate organizations, both, you know, the shareholder pressure with their ESG goals, and also the attracting talent, the importance of the sustainability goals. And we certainly see it with many of the clients we're working with. Nearly 70% of the Forbes, you know, best companies in the world, we're seeing that the ESG goals are becoming a vital part of their employee attraction and employee retention strategies. So something like this, I could see making, you know, a step change really in maybe what they're able to deliver and the speed at which they're able to deliver it.
Interesting. Roger, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you're working on and how you feel they fit into this?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Yeah, obviously there's many things that a manufacturer can do by design for products, particularly in the furniture industry. Alex has already alluded to the reconfigurability and reuse of products and long life of products, and then there's the materiality, recycled products. We've looked into a lot of recycled materials, from recycled cartons to plastic. Obviously there's the PET obvious one, but there's a lot of other solid plastic boards that you can use, and going right through to even brewery waste, injection molding and things like that. But I think one of the most exciting ones that we have worked on, particularly this year, is mycelium. So there's quite a lot of talk around that product, and there's a good reason for it, because it's the life cycle of the whole thing is just really where every product would like to be. It's made from agricultural waste, which is freely available throughout the world. So it's not even a specific product like banana leaves or something, which would have to be imported to use. So it's freely available. and it's grown very quickly. And one of the best things that can happen to it is to return to the landfill. So normally speaking, we try and avoid landfill, but actually this product, the return to the landfill is the best thing that can happen to it. And you don't need an end-of-life product strategy. I think that's really key. That can be a management overhead, but with this product, it doesn't really matter what happens to it, because in the end, it ends up biodegrading and turning back into a product that's completely environmentally safe. I don't know whether that helps, Gordon.
Yeah, very interesting. And we have some of that product around our showrooms. And what is so neat about it is the different ways that you can manipulate it into form, shape, the way that you can use it as an acoustic material. And I think just to be able to tell that story, we had it at NeoCon and Clark and Well Design Week. And to tell that story, I think a lot of our clients are saying, this is something that, as Kim even alluded to, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it. It's got, those heuristic pieces to it that, your employees say, look, we're doing something, but it's not just, I was going to say a picture on the wall, but it's actually a physical, tangible piece of something that we're doing. So I think that's really interesting. And one of the things that I, just in the little research that I did, I thought was interesting was regenerative design brings up the old mantra of recycle, reduce, reuse, but moving it to restore, renew, and replenish. And that's actually really what we're doing is we're taking something and restoring it actually into an architectural product. And then, as you noted, the end of life cycle to it, it's naturally inherently wants to go back in the ground again or reuse it in another format. Kim, just interested, what other products or pieces within a workspace environment? I think as both Alex and Naomi said about touching on retaining our and attracting talent to our spaces. And that's always the challenge, whether we like the conversation or not, is to bringing employees back into the office and they want to see something meaningful happening within the space. Love your insights into that.
Yeah, definitely. So there's been a few initiatives that I've come across. So one is even just on a very, very simplistic level is telling the story about reused furniture just by identifying furniture throughout the office, whether it's 95%, whether it's 30% of items that have been reused. So just modeling that maybe with recycled stickers. We also, urban mining, so that reuse of different materials, different purposes is in itself a great story. And as I think Alex mentioned earlier, just being able to have colleagues genuinely be able to associate with certain materials. So I think it's in the JLL's Canary Wharf reception, the reception worktop and the kitchen worktops all made of recycled yogurt pots, and reception side panels, they're very much acoustic, wall coverings as well, they're 60% recycled leather waste. There are initiatives as well of colleagues bringing in certain materials which they themselves can contribute towards the remanufacturing of other items. So it's getting that bring the colleagues along on that journey, but also them seeing an end result. I think part of what we're doing in some of our projects at the moment. I'm not sure, Naomi, if you've had any other examples of kind of the colleague engagement on some of the Genza projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some things that I think are great ideas, which is using the workplace as a teaching and learning environment in a lot of ways. You can put QR codes on materials, on, biophilic moments. See biophilia on the wall in front of me again. And people understand why it's there. And then all of a sudden they're connected to that mission, that purpose, and that makes a big difference. I also think that there's a lot of conversation. You mentioned work from anywhere versus return to office, Gordon. I think I think it's important to a lot of people to know their numbers, which is where we come back to the carbon accounting part of this conversation. You know, if you can be transparent with people about this is how much, this is when it makes sense for us to keep the office, say, open at full blast when we have this many people. This is the contribution our office makes to our total carbon footprint. Here's what it looks like when you work from home, you know, and we can do commute surveys and figure out what that scope 3 emissions tends to look like. We can start to extrapolate that out into your personal energy use. I mean, I think we're going to have to get a lot more comprehensive about understanding total footprint of companies themselves in order to help individuals make good choices aligned with their values. And you know, I think it's always, I think someone mentioned in the chat, there might be trade-offs, right? There might have to be a set of priorities that we have to make. Oh, recording stopped. Sorry to hear that.
Sorry.
But I do think that open conversation piece is going to be really important, and especially returning to the S part of ESG, you know, thinking about what an individual company can do to have a positive impact on its community and on its neighborhood, you know, beyond the Pretz you're supporting and the, you know, the news shop down the street. Are you giving something back to a neighborhood that it wouldn't otherwise have? Are you elevating people? Are you bringing other SMEs or other organizations along with you on your journey? And I think that sort of thing, the better it can be communicated and engaged and aligned with both individual and corporate mission, the more successful it's likely to be.
I'm going to put a controversial. Sorry, go on, Kim.
No, I was going to pivot a little bit, so go ahead, Warren.
No, I'm going to put a controversial comment out there. Is it more sustainable to have your team working together in the office than individuals, you know, working from home with their ACs blasting and their lights on, or to bring them into a consolidated area? You know, just a thought when you mentioned it, but it is true. You know, we don't think about that. Like, if we're all working from home, we're all consuming energy. The office is still consuming energy. Not that I'm pushing one direction or another, but it is just an interesting thought. Do we realize what we're contributing? But then you have the commute aspect of it. So it's just this, I think the holistic view is what a lot of companies are trying to get around. Yeah. You know, you can do meaningful things, as you mentioned, in the office. We can do meaningful touch points, but it's actually incorporating the whole community, the whole idea. But go on, Kim.
No, just answering that. I think it's a really interesting question you posed. I'm sure it also differs country by country. So you mentioned AC, for example, not necessarily frequently in homes around the UK, but the commuting part is key, and that's also a key part of our building selection process in terms of the locations of offices, and even the consideration of this. This is just my personal opinion, but when we've still got HR policies where we've got company cars to quite kind of long-standing agreements with colleagues of having company cars, and that to me seems quite outdated. I feel like there might be a policy shift over time to really promote people going to the office by public transport or kind of greener methods, rather than celebrating the option of having kind of a company car to take you to and from the office. So I think it's a really interesting story, and I'm sure there have been studies trying to map out that difference between working from home and the energy consumption versus commuting in and using a larger building consumption. Mothballing space is something that we've also been doing at WTW, where we haven't seen a need to be providing all of the space. We don't typically mothball or kind of close off HVAC on a short term on certain days. It's more of a strategic approach of emptying out particular floors if they're not going to be used. But I'd be interested to see if there's any other case studies out there.
Yeah, and that just leads me, love to hear any comments from our audience. If you want to ask a question to Naomi or Kim, please put it into the chat box. Love to, take your questions around this topic, and also what you're doing in your own environments or what your clients are doing. Any further thoughts, Alex?
I'd be interested, and I think we're touching on it already, but be interested in the thoughts from the panel around what we think the future trajectory of this whole topic is, carbon accounting versus regenerative design. And it feels a bit kind of one or the other. And I think, as you've already alluded to, Naomi, actually the two are very, very closely interlinked. And in some ways, the carbon accounting is actually used as your scoreboard for how you're doing with your regenerative design process. But be interested in any insights you have around what you think the future trajectory is going to be, and how, I suppose, thinking of our audience, how can individuals and organizations be on board with that and be part of that future trajectory?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm most excited about regenerative design in the sense of asking ourselves really big questions, reimagining our industry, putting out really bold visions for what our future cities and ways of living could look like. And I'm excited about it not only because I love to think about weird things, but also because, frankly, that's where we need to be, right? We're past the point of thinking about doing less bad, and we need to think about making positive change in our environments and in the world. So let's embrace it and think about the design opportunity that presents us. And I think we like to throw out big, bold ideas that we need help. We need a coalition of people to help us realize and bring to life. For example, can you grow a building? Is there a way to think about a building as a living organism that you need to water and maintain and feed the same way you would a houseplant, but essentially it's a living organism? One of my classmates, actually from architecture school, has an amazing piece of work called Low Tech, and she studies indigenous communities around the world that do grow buildings and bridges and have ways of interacting with their environments that are very adapted to the climate and to the biodiversity around them. And I feel like in some ways, bringing together high tech and low tech to solve some of these problems and coming up with radically different solutions can really show us what might be, and not just tell us, here's a list of things you can't do, but here's how exciting a future could be if we go all in and think about a totally different future.
Fascinating, very interesting. And if you could share, Kim, around what you're seeing in terms of future trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree. I think I'm most excited for the looking at regenerative kind of design going forward. But I also, for me, the fundamentals still link back to that carbon accounting. So we need to continue to measure, track our carbon emissions, identify opportunities where we can make those reductions. And until that is fully scalable as well, I feel like we shouldn't let go of our focus on that, because we need to make sure it's across, we're doing everything we can in that area, whilst also growing and looking at some of the additional opportunities. So we mentioned that earlier, the biodiversity. So conservation very much supports carbon storage, and kind of focusing on that as to what's next in the way that Naomi has been working with partners as to the benefits of passing carbon from industry or from different uses. I think from a biodiversity perspective, I did a bit of research yesterday as to one of the buildings that has always stood out to me as very biodiverse, and it's actually a building in Singapore called Park Royale on Pickering, which is quite an iconic building, and actually it was built 10 years ago. So and a lot of the concepts do lean on that regenerative design. So the sky gardens, the planted terraces, vertical greenery, it actually constitutes more than 200% of the total land area, and it has things like high performance glass that cuts out solar heat. It's using the positioning of certain walls to reduce the need for certain energy consumption. It's been using certain materials, I think Cobias technology, to reduce concrete usage by placing different void formers in there, which are made out of environmentally friendly plastics. So I just think that it's not the regenerative direction that we're going in isn't brand new. It's just quite topical at the moment. So I'm just really keen to see things grow, and the technology that's coming through and the research that's coming through. That very much excites me.
An interesting question that's just come up in the Q&A from one of our attendees around practical tips to ensure that, and I think this is an interesting point, that each of our stakeholders are held accountable to reach the goals that we've been set, or that we've set. I'm guessing, as probably with many things in life, this is a team effort, isn't it? We're never going to get, no organisation nor individual is going to get the progress individually, but holding multiple stakeholders accountable. I was interested in what you were saying, Kim, around building shortlisting, vendor shortlisting, and Naomi, I think you mentioned as well the way that Gensler approached it. And anything you can share practical tips wise that will help our audience in that area?
So I think everyone's scope is going to be different. It's just trying to focus on what you as an individual can influence. From my perspective, the real estate team, so outside of my remit, the real estate team very much focus on that, the building selection aspects, and my contribution comes in terms of commute analysis as well. So it's where we can influence is important, but in terms of furniture, the circular economy or second life furniture, there's been talk of it for the last 5+ years, but I've really seen it come to fruition recently in a lot of investment as to that longevity, flexible, easy disassembly of modular parts, recycled materials. So that's come really far, and I feel like it's our responsibility, if it's within your scope, to really challenge the status quo. So you may just typically go for XYZ furniture products, but actually spend time or partner with people to really invest in what else is out there. RN's got an amazing circular hub in the Netherlands. We're doing a project in France, and we'll be partnering with a company that really specializes in refurbished furniture. There are, for shorter leases, there are quite new companies like Norm who do subscription-based furnishing models, which allow you to adapt and really have that fully circular, embrace the fully circular economy for the shorter leases. So I think it's just, for me, it's really helpful hearing what's out there. And I think what I'd like to give back, or I'd love to gather with the likes of Space Store, with Naomi, like start having a central place where we can start gathering all the good practices. So even on LinkedIn, I was just sharing ideas more and seeing all the good stuff that's coming up, because we're responsible for passing those messages through, and if we can influence it, then it's really putting our best foot forward to do so.
Very interesting. Naomi, what can you share?
Yeah, I think on our side, we are a large global company, and realize that one of the biggest things we can do is influence our supply chain using our scale, which is sort of a strange thing to realize. That's like, oh, we'll throw our weight around, but it can make a difference. We do 1.5 billion square feet every year, so even small things like making sure we have the right flooring. If you imagine 1.5 billion square feet of flooring, that adds up, right? So what we've recently implemented after a lot of research is what we call the Gensler product specifications, or the GPS. So every supplier we work with, for every product that we want to specify on a project, they have to meet a certain set of criteria related to sourcing, related to recyclability, related to any red list materials. Ideally, they will be able to provide an embodied carbon count for us, so that we can make intelligent decisions on behalf of our clients, and so that we know which products we frankly shouldn't be specifying anymore. And I think that's helpful information to go back to the supply chain to say, look, we're not using vinyl anymore. We're only using marmoleum, right? So what can you give us that has similar properties that's going to meet our clients' needs? And so very simple things like that, I think, we see a lot of potential to make change. I think in the longer term, we do think that we are in a position to help broker and connect some of the dots that Kim was talking about, right? Is there a way that we can help build a global platform for furniture exchange and sharing, or for example, right? We have one client over here who's moving out, another client over here who's moving in. It seems like there's a missed opportunity for somebody to say, hey, why don't you guys talk to each other? Is there an opportunity for us to have conversations with material suppliers and say, can we transition you from a good to a service where, exactly as Kim was saying, what if gypsum wallboard isn't something that you buy and it's an asset, but it's something that you essentially lease for the life that you need that gypsum wallboard, and when the partition comes down, it goes back to the same person who manufactured it. So can we start to have slightly more spiky conversations with some of our supply chain to get us to where we need to go?
Kind of like setting a new benchmark.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So stepping up.
It's a really interesting conversation because I know Roger's been working on some of our products, and one of the products, just a little plug for Space Store, is our verandas product. So it's the meeting room that never dies. You have the ability, the framework stays, you can reclad it. And I know even in a lot of our product designs, we've been working on how can we just reupholster it rather than chuck all the the framework of the product out. Can we reclad it? Can we reupholster it, in 5 years' time? And I know we have about 10 minutes left here. We have a question that's come in about going back to the historical architecture of ancient Rome, for example. A lot of these places are still standing. They've weathered the test of time. Is there sustainable material that doesn't have quite as long as a life cycle? Or one of the things I was just thinking about this question is how can we restore it or repurpose it later? So I don't think it's about, building a piece of furniture that sits there for 50 years in your grandmom's lounge and it's there, but rather can we repurpose it in 5 years' time to give it a second life but being sustainable about it. Love your input on that.
Yeah, I think Kim mentioned at the beginning, one of the most important questions that we challenge our clients with is, do you need a new building, right? Is there something out there that could suit your needs? And within the office, the commercial office building space, we're seeing a flight to quality where those with an EPC A rating, even some of those with EPC B rating, are commanding higher rents, whereas those with the C's and D's are being left behind. But so I think we're definitely encouraging our clients to think about buildings as stock, whether that is something to be repurposed and brought back together, or as a material bank that you literally take apart and harvest for your new building, which I think is exciting. And we're also working on a couple of tools that help developers specifically figure out what is the best use for your building, right? Maybe it was designed to be a commercial office building, but that doesn't make sense anymore given whatever environment they're seeing, whatever location they're sat in. Can we think about it for resi? Can we think about it for lab? Can we do some really high level assessments to figure out whether there's a higher, better use for that building as a stock? So stuff like that, I think is really exciting, and it's a broader conversation than we've had before.
I think it was mentioned before about furniture perhaps being used, so the quality needs to be good. It needs to be able to be have that longevity over time, but also modularity is really helpful. But what we're also spending a lot of time doing at the moment is building or creating spaces that are multi-purpose so that they can be easily reconfigured to suit different uses which essentially optimizes the use of the space. But it's not just what furniture we're putting in, it's also what walls going up, if at all, if needed. So can we actually avoid putting in certain walls? Can we put in this movable furniture instead, which can segregate the space? And there's always a time and a place. So if you're looking for space for confidential conversations, then walls would be probably more appropriate. However, having what the Space Store product, for example, is having that modular build out space that also has the benefits of acoustic and being able to being an enclosed space is perfect. So it's really making sure that we are creating the right space for the right activities, and we are designing it with the furniture in mind as well, rather than just designing certain areas and then 2 months later just fitting furniture as per needed. It needs to be brought together in a singular process.
Just going back a minute or two, but be interested in any insights you both could share. Now, you mentioned around that, we've got a project happening here and a project happening there where there might be some scope for furniture to be reused and kind of repurposed one to the other. I see and hear about that sort of thing quite a bit, and it's usually kind of a stroke of luck where the one project meets the other project. And I don't know if you've seen any either platforms or forums where our audience or clients that we're working with could be having those conversations and just joining both ends of that dialogue up in a bit more of a planning to be more lucky, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, it's a really good question. I mean, we have been piloting a platform internally that we call G-Salvage. We were piloting it in the States. I will have to check and see to what extent it's actually active and live in the UK. But I do think that a lot of consultants will be a really good resource for that. I would imagine most PMs, most designers, architects, furniture providers would have a pretty good sense of where these things could come from and can help broker those conversations. And I do think it requires a little bit of boldness and thinking outside the box and maybe asking questions we might not have been comfortable asking before.
Very interesting. Is there anything you've come across, Kim? Any platforms or forums that you've found work?
Not a platform in itself. JLL touring their office, they were pointing out different furniture that they've been able to obtain from different clients, and obviously they're in the fortuitous position of knowing what leases are coming up and which moves are going to happen. So I certainly think there is an opportunity to grow that and to make it kind of accessible and more visible across companies rather than just kind of internally within a particular team. I think it would be certainly something that would benefit all. I think cross-boundary moves of furniture and assets and whatnot can always be a bit of a headache, but again, things are improving. So once a team has mastered it once, they know the processes to go through. So I definitely think there's a market for that.
100%. Very good. I think we must be almost on time. Gordon, do you want to share any final thoughts?
No, this has been really helpful, and I think just having this insight, into a topic that there is a lot of buzz around, but actually, putting it into practice and getting the tangible results, I think is really helpful. So we really appreciate the insight, both Kim and Naomi, that you brought to this conversation. Appreciate the questions that have come in from our audience. And, we look forward to the next Insights Live conversation. But that is it for us today. Thank you again. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our panelists for joining us. And have a good day wherever you may be in the world.
Thanks a lot.